Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now, let's step inside.
Nothing happens by accident in prison. From the outside, prison looks like a place defined by walls, bars, and locked doors. Most people imagine control in its most obvious form: steel gates slamming shut, guards standing watch, keys turning in locks. But inside prison, real control rarely announces itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It works quietly, patiently, and relentlessly, woven into every minute of the day. In prison, nothing happens by accident. Every sound an inmate hears in the morning, every step they take down a corridor, every moment they sit, stand, eat, sleep, or wait, has already been decided. Long before a person enters a cell, the system has mapped out how their time will move, how their body will adjust, and how their mind will respond. Control in prison is not chaotic. It is calculated. The day often begins before the sun rises, not because inmates choose to wake up early, but because the institution decides when rest ends. Lights come on at a fixed hour, not gradually, not gently, but decisively. This is not about efficiency alone. It's about reminding everyone inside that their internal clock no longer belongs to them. Even sleep, the most personal human need, becomes regulated. From that moment forward, the clock becomes the most powerful object in the building. Meals are not eaten when hunger appears. They arrive when the schedule allows. Showers are not taken when a person feels dirty, but when time slots open. Conversations are not ended naturally. They are cut short by count time, movement restrictions, or alarms. Silence is not peaceful, it is enforced. Noise is not spontaneous, it is permitted. And waiting becomes the dominant experience. Waiting to eat, waiting to move, waiting to speak, waiting for doors to open, waiting for doors to close again. In the free world, time flows around individual choice. In prison, time presses down on the individual. It does not bend. It does not pause. It teaches one lesson over and over again. You do not control the next moment. Someone else does. What makes this system especially powerful is that it rarely needs physical force to work. The schedule itself becomes the authority. Inmates quickly learn that resistance is not met with chaos, but with more waiting, more delay, more restriction. Control tightens not through violence, but through routine. Psychologically, this changes everything. When a person no longer controls basic decisions, when to eat, when to move, when to speak, the brain begins to adapt. Expectations shrink. Initiative fades. Planning ahead becomes difficult because the future no longer belongs to the individual. Over time, many inmates stop asking when something will happen. They ask if it will happen at all. This is not accidental. Prison systems across the world rely on structure not just to manage people, but to reshape behavior. Predictability reduces resistance. Repetition dulls emotional reactions. Overregulation creates dependency. The goal is not constant punishment, it is compliance. A population that moves when told, waits without complaint, and adapts to restriction without questioning it. And it starts with the smallest details. A meal tray passed through a slot. A door opened for exactly 60 seconds. A walk that must stay within painted lines. A voice that must remain at a certain volume. Each rule by itself seems minor. Together, they form an environment where freedom of choice slowly erodes, replaced by instruction. Even time itself becomes fragmented. Days are broken into segments: count, chow, work, recreation, lockdown. Weeks blur together. Months pass without markers. Holidays feel distant, abstract. Birthdays arrive and leave without ceremony. Life becomes measured not by meaning, but by movement permissions. Inside this system, inmates quickly learn that reacting emotionally brings consequences, but not reacting at all brings survival. Emotional restraint becomes a skill. Stillness becomes protection. Silence becomes a language. And yet, to the outside world, prison often appears stable, orderly, controlled. What isn't visible is the internal cost of that control, how it reshapes identity, how it alters decision-making, how it teaches people to think smaller, slower, and quieter. Prison does not simply confine bodies, it reprograms daily life. It replaces personal rhythm with institutional rhythm. Over time, even those who leave carry traces of this system with them. the habit of waiting, the fear of being late, the instinct to ask permission, even when none is required. This documentary is not about chaos behind bars. It is about precision, about how control is built hour by hour, rule by rule, routine by routine, about how power operates most effectively when it becomes invisible, and about how a place designed to hold people also reshapes how they experience time, choice, and themselves. Because in prison, nothing is random, nothing is neutral, and nothing, absolutely nothing, happens by accident. Time is the first thing prison takes. When a person enters prison, the first thing they lose is not freedom of movement. It is ownership of time. Before the uniform is issued, before the cell door closes, before the rules are even fully explained, the institution has already taken control of the most fundamental human resource, the ability to decide when things happen. In prison, time no longer belongs to the individual. It belongs to the system. Outside prison, time is flexible. People wake when they choose, eat when they are hungry, rest when they are tired, and move according to personal priorities. Even obligations, work, school, appointments, exist within a framework where individuals still negotiate their own schedules. Inside prison, that flexibility disappears completely. Time becomes rigid, segmented, enforced. Every prison day is broken into blocks, and those blocks rarely change. Wake-up happens at the same hour every day, regardless of weather, health, or exhaustion. Lights come on not to help inmates start their day, but to signal that the institution is now active. The message is immediate and unmistakable. Personal rhythms are irrelevant here. From that point forward, the clock dictates everything. Count times interrupt sleep, conversations, meals, and thoughts. At designated moments, inmates must stand in specific locations while officers visually confirm their presence. This process happens multiple times a day and night. It serves a security purpose, but it also reinforces something deeper. Your presence is monitored, scheduled, and verified on demand. Meals follow the same logic. Breakfast does not arrive because people are hungry. It arrives because the schedule says it is time. Lunch may come early in the afternoon, dinner uncomfortably early in the evening. Hunger becomes something to manage internally, not something the environment responds to. Over time, the body adapts, but the psychological effect remains. Needs are no longer signals that matter. Movement is equally regulated. In many facilities, inmates cannot leave their housing units unless movement is authorized. Even then, walking paths are fixed, destinations are limited, and time windows are narrow. Miss the window, and the opportunity disappears entirely. A late step does not delay the system. The system simply moves on without you. This teaches an important lesson very quickly. The prison does not wait. The institution's schedule is absolute. Individuals must adjust themselves to it, not the other way around. Over time, inmates stop planning based on desire or motivation. They plan based on permission and availability. What matters is not what you want to do, but whether the clock allows it. This constant time pressure changes how people think. In the free world, time encourages ambition. People think ahead, next week, next month, next year. Inside prison, long-term thinking often feels pointless. Schedules are repetitive, days blur together, and future events feel distant and abstract. Instead of looking forward, many inmates focus on the next count, the next meal, the next unlock. This is not accidental. Shortening a person's sense of time reduces resistance. When life becomes a series of immediate checkpoints, there is less mental space for challenge or defiance. Energy is spent navigating the present moment, not questioning the system itself. Even leisure time follows strict boundaries. Recreation periods, when they exist, are timed to the minute. Access to phones, showers, or common areas is limited and often shared among many people. This turns time into a resource that must be competed for. Waiting becomes constant. Frustration becomes internalized. And then there is idle time. Large portions of the prison day involve doing nothing, not because nothing needs to be done, but because movement is restricted. Inmates may sit on bunks, stand in place, or stare at walls while waiting for the next scheduled activity. This kind of forced idleness is mentally exhausting. Without control over time, boredom becomes oppressive rather than relaxing. Psychologically, the effect is profound. When people cannot control their time, they often lose a sense of agency. Decision-making skills weaken. Motivation declines. Initiative feels risky because acting outside the schedule can bring consequences. Slowly, many inmates learn that the safest approach is compliance, not enthusiastic compliance, but quiet acceptance. Time discipline also affects sleep. Lights out does not guarantee rest. Noise, stress, and nighttime counts interrupt sleep cycles. Waking up is mandatory even when exhaustion is overwhelming. Over weeks and months, chronic fatigue becomes common. Tired people are easier to manage. They react more slowly, question less, and conserve energy. Again, this is not chaos. It is structure. Prison time is designed to be predictable, not comfortable. Predictability reduces conflict. It teaches the population what to expect and when to expect it. But predictability also creates monotony, and monotony dulls emotional response. Over time, days lose distinction. Special moments disappear. Life becomes measured in routine rather than meaning. This is how control embeds itself quietly. No shouting is required. No constant force is necessary. The clock does the work. By controlling time, prison establishes dominance over every other aspect of life. Food, movement, conversation, rest, all are governed by the schedule. Once time is no longer personal, everything else follows. And this is only the beginning. Because once time is taken, the system moves on to something even more powerful: space. Space is designed to limit the mind. After prison takes control of time, it turns to something just as powerful: space. To the outside world, prison space looks simple: cells, hallways, yards, fences. But inside, space is carefully engineered to shape behavior, limit choice, and guide movement without constant instruction. Every wall, line, and barrier exists for a reason. Nothing is placed randomly. Nothing is left open-ended. In prison, space does not invite exploration. It directs compliance. From the moment an inmate is assigned housing, their physical world becomes dramatically smaller. A cell, often shared, becomes the primary environment, where sleeping, resting, reading, and thinking all happen within a few steps. The limited square footage is not just about confinement. It is about reducing stimulation. Fewer visual cues, fewer choices, fewer distractions. This creates predictability, but also psychological pressure. When space is restricted, the mind adapts by turning inward. Thoughts loop more easily. Minor frustrations feel larger. There is little opportunity to reset mentally through movement or change of scenery. Even when inmates leave their cells, they are rarely free to wander. Movement happens along designated paths, at approved times, to approved locations. Lines on the floor matter. Doors determine direction. Corners become checkpoints. In many facilities, inmates walk single file, eyes forward, hands visible. This is not only about security. It trains spatial awareness in a specific way. Do not claim space. Occupy only what is permitted. Over time, people stop spreading out, stop lingering, stop choosing where to stand. They learn to minimize their physical presence. Common areas, when accessible, are rarely comfortable. Seating is fixed. Tables are bolted down. Open spaces are often empty by design. This discourages gathering and limits informal interaction. Even recreation yards, which appear open, are enclosed, monitored, and regulated. Freedom exists only within boundaries that are constantly visible. Visibility is key. Prison architecture prioritizes sightlines. Long corridors allow officers to see far ahead. Elevated control booths overlook living areas. Mirrors eliminate blind spots. This constant visibility creates a sense of being watched, even when no one is actively looking. The result is internalized surveillance. People begin to monitor themselves. Inmates learn where to stand, where not to stand, when to move, and when to remain still. They learn that occupying the wrong space, even briefly, can bring attention. Over time, many choose invisibility as a form of safety. Staying out of the way becomes a survival strategy. This affects social behavior deeply. In the free world, space encourages interaction. People gather naturally, form groups, drift between conversations. In prison, space restricts this flow. Interaction must fit within spatial rules. Conversations are often short, fragmented, and location-dependent. Privacy is rare, and when it exists, it is often informal and fragile. Cells themselves reinforce this reality. Even when alone, privacy is limited. Doors may be solid or barred, but sound travels. Light leaks in. Observation is constant. The sense of being truly unseen, of existing without scrutiny, almost disappears. Over time, this can make people more guarded, more controlled in how they speak and behave. Space also reinforces hierarchy. Certain areas are restricted entirely. Others are accessible only to specific roles, workers, trustees, or those with certain privileges. Access becomes a signal of status. Where a person is allowed to go reflects where they stand within the system. This creates internal divisions without the need for constant enforcement. And then there is isolation. Some spaces are designed to remove almost all stimulation. Smaller rooms, fewer objects, limited movement. These areas are not only about discipline, they are about control through deprivation. When space shrinks further, the mind feels the pressure immediately. Time slows. Thoughts become louder. Emotional regulation becomes harder. Even without discussing extreme conditions, the principle is clear. Space shapes experience. When people cannot choose where to go, how long to stay, or who to avoid, autonomy erodes. Decision-making narrows. The world becomes predictable but restrictive. Over time, this predictability trains compliance more effectively than force ever could. What makes this system especially powerful is how normal it becomes. After weeks or months, inmates stop noticing the barriers consciously. The lines, doors, and checkpoints fade into the background, but behavior remains shaped by them. People hesitate before stepping forward. They wait for signals. They look for permission, even when none is explicitly given. This is how space becomes psychological, not by locking people in constantly, but by teaching them where they belong and where they do not. And once time and space are fully controlled, the system turns to something even more subtle and powerful: routine. Because routine doesn't just organize life, it rewires it. Routine becomes the real authority. Once prison controls time and space, it introduces something even more powerful than rules or walls: routine. Routine is what turns control into habit. It is how authority stops feeling external and starts feeling inevitable. In prison, routine is not simply a schedule. It is a system designed to condition behavior through repetition. The same actions, at the same times, in the same order, day after day. And slowly, the routine replaces resistance. Every prison day follows a familiar pattern. Wake up, count, meals, movement, work or assigned inactivity, recreation, another count, lockdown, lights out. The sequence rarely changes. Holidays do not interrupt it. Weather does not alter it. Personal circumstances do not matter. The routine remains steady, regardless of who you are or how you feel. This consistency serves an important purpose. When people know exactly what will happen next, uncertainty disappears, but so does autonomy. There is no need to make decisions, because the system has already made them. Over time, this removes the mental effort required to plan, choose, or adapt. The brain shifts from active thinking to passive anticipation. Inmates stop asking, "What should I do today?" They start asking, "What happens next?" This is a critical psychological shift. Routine reduces anxiety in the short term because unpredictability is stressful, but in the long term, it weakens independence. When the same actions are repeated daily, initiative feels unnecessary and eventually unsafe. Doing something outside the routine, even something harmless, can attract attention. And attention inside prison often leads to consequences. So people learn to stay within the pattern. Meals are eaten quickly, not because of hunger, but because time is limited. Showers become rushed. Conversations are cut short instinctively. Even thoughts begin to align with the routine, focused on the next scheduled event rather than long-term goals or personal reflection. This creates a form of behavioral efficiency. The prison does not need to constantly enforce compliance, because the routine does it automatically. Inmates line up without being told. They return to cells on time. They prepare for count before it begins. The system runs smoothly not through constant force, but through learned behavior. What makes routine especially powerful is that it feels neutral. There is nothing dramatic about eating at the same time every day. Nothing extreme about standing for count. Nothing overtly threatening about lights out. Each action seems minor on its own, but together, They create a structure that governs every aspect of life. And that structure becomes difficult to question. Over time, many inmates begin to feel uncomfortable when routine is disrupted. A delayed meal, a late count, an unexpected schedule change. Instead of relief, these disruptions often cause stress. This is how deeply routine embeds itself. The system trains people to rely on it, even when it limits them. Routine also affects identity. In the free world, people define themselves by choices, careers, relationships, hobbies, routines they design for themselves. In prison, identity is flattened. Everyone follows the same basic structure, regardless of background or personality. Individuality becomes harder to express, not because it is forbidden, but because there is little space for it to exist. Clothing is uniform. Movement is synchronized. Activities are standardized. Over time, people stop seeing themselves as decision-makers and start seeing themselves as participants in a process they do not control. This is not accidental. A population that runs on routine is predictable. Predictable populations are easier to manage. They require fewer interventions, fewer confrontations, fewer resources. Routine creates order, but it also creates dependency. And that dependency doesn't disappear when the day ends. Even at night, routine continues. Lights out happens at the same hour. Noise levels change. Sleep becomes structured rather than natural. The body adjusts, but the mind remains alert, waiting for the next interruption. Count times may occur during the night, reinforcing the idea that rest is conditional. Over months and years, routine reshapes how people experience time itself. Days blend together. Weeks lose distinction. Events outside prison feel distant and unreal. The present moment becomes dominant, not because it is meaningful, but because it is all that feels tangible. This is how routine becomes authority, not by issuing commands, but by removing the need for them. By the time someone fully adapts, the routine no longer feels imposed. It feels normal, expected, even necessary. And that is when control becomes most complete, when it no longer needs to be enforced. But routine is only one layer. Because once behavior is stabilized, the system turns inward to the mind itself. The mind learns to self-regulate. After time is controlled, space is restricted, and routine is established, prison reaches its most effective stage of control, the internal one. At this point, authority no longer needs to constantly intervene. The system has already taught people how to regulate themselves. Rules become habits. Surveillance becomes expectation. Control moves from the outside in. This is where prison power becomes quiet, but strongest. Inside prison, behavior is shaped not only by what is allowed, but by what is anticipated. Inmates learn quickly that actions carry consequences, even when those consequences are delayed or indirect. A single decision, speaking too loudly, reacting emotionally, standing in the wrong place, can lead to restrictions later. Over time, this creates a pattern of self-monitoring. People begin to pause before they act. They weigh reactions carefully. They suppress impulses automatically. This is not fear in the dramatic sense. It is calculation. The mind adapts by learning what not to do. Emotional expression becomes measured. Body language becomes restrained. Many inmates develop a neutral presence, not drawing attention, not appearing confrontational, not appearing vulnerable. This emotional flattening is a form of protection, but it comes at a cost. Suppressing emotion for long periods does not eliminate it. It redirects it inward. Anger, frustration, sadness, and anxiety often have no safe outlet. Over time, this can dull emotional awareness. Some inmates report feeling disconnected from their own reactions, as if emotions exist at a distance rather than in real time. This internal control is reinforced constantly by observation. Even when no officer is nearby, the possibility of observation remains. Cameras, sightlines, other inmates. The environment teaches people that someone may always be watching. Eventually, this external surveillance becomes internalized. People behave as if they are being observed even when they are alone. This changes thought patterns. Instead of asking, "What do I want to do?" the question becomes, "What will this look like?" Decision-making becomes risk-avoidant. Creativity declines. Spontaneity disappears. Over time, many inmates stop initiating behavior unless it feels completely safe. Silence becomes preferable to misunderstanding. Stillness becomes preferable to attention. Even conversation adapts. Topics are chosen carefully. Words are measured. Tone matters. Miscommunication can create conflict, and conflict attracts attention. So people learn to speak less, listen more, and keep emotional distance. Relationships, when they form, are often cautious and limited. This mental discipline is not taught formally. It is learned through experience. A warning here, a restriction there, an example made of someone else. Watching consequences happen to others is often enough. The system does not need to punish everyone. It only needs to be consistent. Over time, this creates a population that regulates itself. Rules no longer need to be announced loudly. People already know them. Enforcement becomes lighter because compliance is internal. The institution appears calm, orderly, controlled, not because control is absent, but because it has already succeeded. This internalization can follow people beyond prison. Former inmates often describe lingering habits, hesitation before making choices, discomfort with unstructured time, a tendency to wait for permission that no longer exists. The mind remembers the system even after the body leaves it. This is one of the most lasting effects of incarceration. Prison does not simply restrict behavior while someone is inside. It teaches patterns that can persist long after release. The ability to self-direct, to choose freely without fear of consequence, can take time to rebuild. And yet, from the outside, this process is invisible. There are no dramatic scenes, no obvious force, just a gradual shift, day by day, where control becomes internal and automatic, where people adjust themselves before the system needs to. This is the true efficiency of prison control. Not domination, but adaptation. And once the mind learns to regulate itself, the system introduces one final element that ensures compliance remains stable over time: privilege. Because control is not only about restriction, it is also about what can be taken away. Privilege becomes the strongest form of control. By the time prison has taken control of time, space, routine, and internal behavior, direct punishment is no longer the primary tool. Instead, the system relies on something far more effective: privilege. Privilege in prison is not about luxury. It is about access. Access to small comforts. Access to limited choices. Access to moments that feel almost normal. And because life inside is so tightly controlled, even the smallest privilege can feel significant. This is how compliance is stabilized. Privileges often include things that would seem ordinary outside prison: extra phone time, access to certain jobs, the ability to move more freely, additional recreation, or improved living conditions. None of these are guaranteed. They are earned, granted, and, most importantly, revocable. That last part is crucial. When something can be taken away easily, it becomes powerful leverage. Inmates quickly learn that good behavior is not just expected, it is rewarded with continuity. Keep following the rules, and life remains predictable. Break them, and privileges disappear. This creates a system where control operates through incentive rather than constant force. People begin to self-correct not because they believe in the rules, but because they want to protect what little autonomy they have gained. A few extra minutes on the phone, a job that provides structure, access to a shared space that breaks the monotony of the cell. Over time, this shifts motivation. Instead of avoiding punishment, inmates focus on preserving stability. Stability becomes the goal. Risk becomes undesirable. Even justified reactions feel dangerous if they threaten access. The safest path becomes obedience, not out of loyalty, but out of practicality. Privilege also creates internal order. Those with access often have more influence within the inmate population. Jobs, movement permissions, or trusted roles signal reliability. This can create informal hierarchies that mirror the institution's values. People police themselves and others, reinforcing the system without direct involvement from staff. This further reduces resistance. When access depends on behavior, individuals become invested in the system working smoothly. Disruption threatens not just rules, but personal benefits. As a result, many inmates actively avoid conflict, report issues indirectly, or distance themselves from trouble. Again, control becomes internal. What makes this system especially effective is its flexibility. Privileges can be adjusted quietly, without public confrontation. A schedule change, a reassignment, a restriction applied without explanation. The message is understood without being spoken, cooperate, or lose access. And because privileges are often tied to routine, their removal feels immediate and personal. Life becomes harder not through force, but through inconvenience. Small comforts vanish. Days feel longer. Waiting becomes heavier. Psychologically, this reinforces dependency. When access determines quality of life, people adapt by aligning behavior with expectations. Over time, compliance feels less like submission and more like strategy. The system rarely needs to escalate because it rarely needs to. This final layer completes the structure of prison control. Time limits choice. Space restricts movement. Routine conditions behavior. The mind self-regulates. Privilege maintains order. Together, they form an environment where authority operates quietly, consistently, and efficiently, not through chaos or constant punishment, but through design. And this design does not end at the prison gate. Many who leave carry these lessons with them. The habit of avoiding risk. The instinct to protect access. The preference for stability over spontaneity. The system leaves an imprint, not visible, but lasting. This is why prison control is so powerful, because it does not rely on fear alone. It relies on adaptation, on learning, on survival. And once all of these elements are in place, the institution no longer needs to fight resistance. It has already replaced it. When control becomes invisible, by the time someone has lived inside prison long enough, control no longer feels like something imposed from the outside. It becomes part of daily life, quiet, predictable, and deeply internalized. Time no longer needs to be enforced. Space no longer needs to be explained. Routine no longer feels restrictive. The mind has already adapted. This is the true power of prison control. It does not rely on constant punishment or visible force. It works through design, through repetition, through small adjustments that slowly reshape how people think, move, and respond. Over time, the system teaches individuals to regulate themselves, to anticipate consequences before they occur, and to limit their own choices without being told. From the outside, this structure can look calm and orderly. But beneath that surface is a complex system that governs behavior hour by hour, day by day. One that replaces personal rhythm with institutional rhythm. One that turns waiting into a way of life. One that teaches people to value stability over freedom and predictability over choice. And the effects do not always end at release. Many who leave prison describe carrying parts of the system with them. Hesitation before acting, discomfort with unstructured time, the instinct to seek permission where none is required. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of adaptation. Evidence of how deeply structured environments can shape the human mind. Understanding prison control is not about defending it or condemning it. It is about recognizing how power operates most effectively when it becomes invisible, when rules no longer need to be enforced loudly because they have already been learned. Because in prison, nothing happens by accident. Every hour is designed. Every movement is measured. Every routine serves a purpose. And once control becomes internal, the system no longer needs to lock every door. The mind does the rest. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.